Okay, bom dia, Lisboa. Did I say that right? All right, almost. Okay, thank you. I'm very glad to be here today. I'm actually very glad to be back. I was here last year on the stage as well. Last year when I was here, I still remember this very well because it was the day after the US election. And, unfortunately, I cannot bring such disruptive gifts today. So, you'll have to deal, simply with me, meandering around and, trying to fill you in on some of my, latest thinking in terms of, what it actually means to analyze data in the context of human instinct and intuition. So, a couple of words on myself. There we go. Good old laser pointer trick. Here we go. So a couple words on myself. I am with SumoLogic. I'm a co-founder and CTO. And at SumoLogic, we have built a machine data analytics platform. We bring logs and metrics and other machine data from all the applications and services into our platform to allow the humans that are responsible for managing the modern applications that you use on a daily basis to make better decisions and to run these applications more efficiently. We have about 1,500 customers around the world, and chances are you have been using some of our customers' digital products. So I'm going to give away the point of my talk in the beginning just so we have a nice set of context. So recently I have been thinking, we keep talking about data processing, data analytics quite a bit. We're trying to use data to make sense of things. But are we actually doing it right? I do feel sometimes that in all of these discussions about data, one thing that isn't being discussed so much is the effect that all of this data analytics has on the actual humans. We're not really talking about what goes through those humans' minds as they create all the analytics. And generally, whenever I go and hear all the talk about data, I wonder where is ultimately the empathy with the humans. So I read this quote recently. People over 45 basically die in terms of new ideas. So I tracked it down. It was said by this guy, Vinod Khosla. Some of you probably know who he is. He's a very famous, a very successful venture capitalist. Clearly this guy must have thought a lot about decision-making, innovation, and ideas, and so forth. But this really hit me to the core. Because guess what? I'm actually German. I've been living in the US for almost 20 years, but I still carry a German passport. And yes, I'm very proud of this picture. You need to understand that in Germany, we're not supposed to smile when we take passport pictures because of the biometrics. So we are an entire country full of people that go like this. But check this out. I was born in 1972, so if you do the math, and I'm sure you can all do that, otherwise you wouldn't be here. In 45 days, I will basically die in terms of new ideas. So that is pretty shocking. It's probably old news to you people, but for me it's pretty shocking. So bringing some context around that, what Vinod was actually trying to get to is the fact that what he was basically saying is the reason why this happens is because as people become more experienced, we are starting to trust their opinions more. And so we find ourselves in a society where, so-called experts and punditry define what people should actually believe. And his argument is that as we go along and become more experienced, the very thing that kind of drives our intuition is actually starting to work against us because it keeps us from making, from taking a look at things in a fresh new way. What's behind all of this? What's behind all of this ultimately is this strife that we all have to figure out what is actually true. How do we make decisions so that we can make the best decisions? What is the true input that has to come in to our decisions, right? And so, so experience is apparently a problem because as you accumulate experience based on this, based on his quote, that actually works against you because you're actually starting to narrow down your cognitive ability to make new and fresh decisions. So if we don't have experience, what else do we have? Well, I'm sure a lot of you have seen some version of this. Data. Certainly when I saw that for the first time, I was like, okay, that makes sense, like the latter part. And why? Well, ultimately the company that I started and that I'm still working with and that I'm very excited about, what we do is we're doing data processing and analytics. So this data thing is near and dear to my heart. We process about a petabyte of new data every 10 days. That comes out to about 100 terabyte per day, which incidentally happens to be, and I just read that in Max Tegmark's book, Life 3.0, 100 terabyte happens to be about the amount of information that a human brain can store in the synapses. So we're basically adding the equivalent of one human brain to our service every day, which is pretty exciting. Ultimately, what we are doing with all this data is we're doing analytics. We're allowing the humans that are using the service to apply statistical methods, to become proactive about understanding what their systems are doing. What we are observing is machines. So, but all that ends up being is sort of, in the end, augmenting the actual human that ultimately has to make the decisions, right? And so now we're in a conundrum because what we're doing is we're supporting the human in making better decisions and becoming more experienced with data, but all we're doing, really, we're just making those humans more narrow-minded as we actually drive their, as we're driving their experience and up and improving their intuition. Well, I actually don't think so. Here's the obligatory reference to Einstein. It seems to be every keynote needs to have a reference to Einstein. I was trying to build a robot yesterday night so I could bring an Einstein robot on stage, but I didn't quite succeed. So what this guy said is the intuitive mind is the thing that actually gets kicks in when you develop experience. In his mind is more important actually than the rational mind, right? And so to me that also makes sense because as much as I work with data and so forth, ultimately I do look at the data as something that helps me in making decisions. I would assume that it is probably true for a lot of you as well. So this should really resonate. At the same time, what we're seeing here is a classic sort of setup of polarity. You have intuition on one hand, you have rationality on the other hand. We see that same sort of idea of dichotomy being used today when we talk about AI. On one hand, we want beneficial AI, like this Aibo robot dog, good dog. And then, of course, the doomsayer scenario, Armageddon, Skynet. So there's more dichotomies that drive our decisions and that drive our sort of daily lives and our discussions. All of these will be familiar to you. People like dichotomies, people like these polar extremes because it's easy to slot yourself in one of the two sides. I'm either a Democrat or I'm a Republican, right? I either watch Fox News or, I'm some sort of anarchist, depending on your viewpoint. The polar opposites at the poles, it's comfortable. It's not like on Earth where it's actually freaking cold. But, intellectually, it can get much more comfortable on those polar opposite sides. And that, ends up creating a problem. And that is a problem that has been going through philosophy for a long time. Classic dichotomy there. On one hand, you have Descartes. On the other hand, you have Heidegger. So now we're going straight over here in the philosophy land. But, come with me. Descartes actually was a very influential philosopher in the early 17th century. And what he basically said was, this is all way too complicated for me. I can't make sense of any of this. You're talking about empiricism and you're talking about, central perception, and I can figure out what's left or right. So I am going to say the thing that really makes me human is my ability to think. I think, therefore I am. Pure reason. Started off the Enlightenment, and very, very interesting philosophy led to a lot of changes in the way that people were going about living their lives, society, and so forth. The guy was also a mathematician. He's a very reasonable, very, very reason-oriented, very rational, will simply not accept that anything is true unless there is no doubt left. That was actually a big shift compared to what the philosophy had to offer humans before. And then in the beginning of the 20th century, you have this guy, Martin Heidegger, who basically flipped the script completely, still considered to be the preeminent philosopher of the 20th century. And he basically said, this thinking thing is overrated. You are not because you are thinking. You are, and therefore you think. With Heidegger, it's all about the experience. It's the Dasein. That's a nice German word that is very hard to actually translate, but basically means it's the being there. It's the fact that you are there. The being that you are, in the moment and over time, that actually defines you. So what we have here is the preeminent philosopher of the 20th century basically claiming that the thinking, again, is to some degree a result of the experiences, of the social circumstances, of the context within which any given human has existed up to that point. And that is ultimately what drives the thinking. And that is really interesting, because what that means is that, no, it's not all about pure reason. It's not all about being able to have perfect deductive logic to explain everything. What it basically says is that it depends. It depends on the person that is trying to make those decisions. And so, as with all, I'm really proud of that one. Can you just clap for a moment? Thank you. The pendulum always swings back and forth between the extremes. It does feel to me sometimes that in today's day and age, over the last couple of years, with the rise of big data, with the rise of additional compute power, new algorithms, and the fact that so much data is available in the first place because we are now basically a network society and we have communications technology, that we are talking a lot about data, about using data to find the truth. But then when you look at what actually happens when people do that, things don't turn out to be that clean. So a couple of examples. This one is fairly new. It's from a couple of weeks ago. So these guys went and they had a crime lab and they basically built a DNA testing software. And you know what? The fucking thing didn't work. But they didn't tell anybody. And so there were thousands of people in New York that were actually potentially convicted because of evidence provided by this DNA testing. And the lab people knew at some point that it wasn't right. And they didn't say anything. So think about the impact and the motivations behind the people that are trying to do this thing, and I'm sure they're trying to do the right thing. I'm sure they're just sitting there trying to figure out how can I solve crimes better by using minuscule DNA examples. And I'm going to just give a score, 99.x, and then that judge is simply going to make a conviction, or even worse, the guy is on the bench, the guy is on trial, he's being presented with this number that looks like, well, you're effed basically, and then he pleads guilty. And then it turns out afterwards, algorithm is wrong, thing doesn't work. It's a huge problem. And they didn't tell anybody, even though they knew. In Israel, a guy was arrested because he said good morning on Facebook, and Facebook automatically translated it into English, and it said, arrest me. Didn't say arrest me, sorry, it said, let's attack. And they were like, oh, that's not good. We need to take this guy out. They didn't talk to anybody who actually spoke Arabic. Last one. College rankings in the US. Bunch of guys came together and said, we need to rank all the colleges. So how do we do that? Well, let's find some proxies. You've got them listed up here. What happened? Systemic issues, fraudulent scores, because universities were ranked lower than they wanted to be, and of course only if they ranked high, they're going to get new students. Killed the safety school concept because one of the actual, one of the proxies was how many people would actually, go and in the end actually graduate from that school. And a lot of people, when they go to safety schools, they go to some other school later on, so they wouldn't even let them in anymore. And ultimately, 500% rise in tuitions because of the massive spend that was required in order to compete with the rankings. Building new buildings, better housing for the students, et cetera, but none of this is free. And this is all data analytics made by humans, affecting humans. So I say, bring me your data, but also bring me your intuition. Bring me your experience. Bring me your context. Bring yourself. Otherwise, how am I supposed to know what are you actually going to try to do when you're talking to me about data? So let's keep this in mind. Data analytics created by humans, by all of you, affects in many cases the lives of other humans directly. Be mindful of what you do. Have empathy with those on whose back you are potentially analyzing data. If you want to read up a little bit more, here are some of the sources for the talk. I'm Ray Chaser on Twitter. Thank you very much.